In my last review, I went over my top 10 personal worst episodes of My Little Pony, Friendship is Magic. And by the way, that's what it is, my own personal worst list. If you like any of them, and I do mean any of them, that's fine, I'm not going to judge you. I should make it clear that I like way more episodes than I don't. Besides those 10 and maybe one or two others, every single episode has something for me. Quite a few of them range from pretty average to pretty good, but these 20 are great. At least with me. The rules. Since I gave more than 20 gold or platinum ratings, each episode featured on here has at least a gold. But why 20? Because there are that many good episodes. Even with 20 on this list, there are some really good ones that I have to leave to the wayside. Are you ready? It's time to celebrate. The opinions on this episode seem to be very mixed. Some people really don't like it because Pinkie never telegraphs her plan, and I will admit that that's pretty much the reason that it isn't any higher on this list. That aside, there are two reasons that I really like this episode. Number one is because it's a tribute to Gremlins, and I really love that movie.
He slipped and broke his neck, died instantly. And that's how I found out there was no Santa Claus.
I really love most of that movie. The second reason is because for me, at least chronologically, this is where the show got good. Each of the characters are finally full realizations of themselves, and each of them get pretty good moments to shine, Pinkie especially. This is also where the humor started to become perfected. The jokes really do make this episode for me. Each visual gag hits home, and the timing is amazing. Is it frustrating that Pinkie doesn't give any clues to what she's doing? Maybe. But she does seem like the kind who would already assume that every pony else knows what her plan is. You know, she's Pinkie. Her mind works a little bit differently, and sometimes you just gotta accept that she isn't working on the same level as everyone else. How I wish I could put this episode higher, but there are just way too many other good, and dare I say better episodes. This is the first episode that I actually watched, so in a way it's one of the episodes that made me a brony. And yes, I did see the parallels obviously with Rainbow Dash and me going through similar hoops at pretty much the exact same time. But no, that's not why I like this episode so much. It's obviously the Daring Do segments. This show can be funny, and the show can be heartfelt. And this episode proved that it could do action-packed outside of the two-parters. Sure, it's pretty much the first part of Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, but it's the first part of Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, and it's completely awesome! I don't think that I'm alone when I say that I want another Daring Do episode. There's just so much potential with this character. After all, if you want to keep parodying Indiana Jones, there's still the entirety of the first movie, 2 other complete films, 2 really good games that would make great stories, and a fanfiction that someone put to film. I told you guys that I liked it. I'm gonna come right out and say it. I absolutely love Disney's Atlantis: The Lost Empire, and whether intentionally or by accident, this two-parter seems to attribute it to a T. If it wasn't done on purpose, it was one hell of a coincidence. But in all seriousness though, the biggest problem with this episode is the drastic and constant tone changes. But when you take each of the stories on their own, they're really good stories. Clearly the better of the two is Twilight and Spike looking for the Crystal Heart, and having some really in-depth and touching moments. That door there is probably my favorite single scene from Season 3 in general. It's funny, isn't it? That one moment there does everything that All's Well That Ends Well did, does it 10 times better, and does it in under 30 seconds. It's not like the other story is bad either. It's actually pretty good. Once again, taken on its own. Each of the main 6 had their moments to shine. Except for Fluttershy, oddly enough. Yeah, Fluttershy is like the anti-Applejack. Applejack really doesn't have a point in episodes where she's the focus, and Fluttershy doesn't seem to have a point in episodes where she's not the focus. Other than that, the episode is pretty good. Pinkie being a spy is still really funny, and the Ballad of the Crystal Empire is a pretty good song too. A lot of people were asking why Ponyville Confidential wasn't on my worst list. Despite the fact that it was disqualified from that list, it somehow ended up on this one instead. CMC episodes have been pretty hit and miss. You'll notice that 3 of them are on my worst list. This one, however, seems to do everything right. Instead of the CMC doing a bunch of random bullshit, they're actually focusing on something for once. I mean, I would like the CMC episodes a lot more if that was the point, instead of throwing them into a ton of random gags. That's not the only reason that I like this episode. The main reason I like this episode, I guess, is how mature it is. It shows the harshness of rumors and the harshness of anger, and it doesn't hold any punches. I mean, if you're going to tell lies about people and others happen to believe you, those people are going to be hurt badly, and they're not really going to want to deal with you. Even if your secrets aren't lies, that doesn't mean they deserve to get reported to the world either. There are a bunch of other little things I love about this episode too, like Fluttershy doesn't have a single line, and yet she has just as much presence as the rest of the main 6. Does this episode get a little too mean? No. I think I respect Rarity a lot more than I like her. I mean, I really do like her, but I like all of the main 6, with the exception of Applejack, who I don't care about. I say I respect her because she had to work the hardest for me to like her. Let's be honest here, if her character was mishandled in the slightest, she could become one of my least favorite characters ever. But as it stands, Rarity has never had one bad episode. It's exceptional here because Rarity does some pretty despicable actions. It would have been so easy for this to become another May the Best Pet win. But no, Rarity does some believably bad actions, but we see her thought process. And as she justifies it to herself, we justify it as well. That doesn't change the fact that the actions are still pretty despicable, so you get a good dilemma going. Even though Rarity doesn't suffer any consequences, it's actually made abundantly clear that she has learned her lesson. That's how you do it. I do not need a character to be punished. I just need them to realize that they did something wrong. This was a great first shot, Miss Powell. In fact, this is like the best first shot ever. The strangest part about this episode is that I should hate it. I mean, it starts out with a Showstoppers reference. I mean, why would you do that? Why would you start out with a reference to one of the most hated episodes of the show? Do I really think that this is a ripoff of Look Before You Sleep? Not really. At least, not as far as I went to in my actual review. It's just, that's what I kept thinking when I watched this episode for the first time. I don't even think I need to say why I like this episode so much. There's tons of heart here. By the way, that's probably the most important part of an episode to me. Heart allows me to look past some of the flaws in an episode. Ha 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 ha! I mean heart that I can actually believe. More importantly, this episode seems to be very reminiscent of Courage the Cowardly Dog, bringing in monsters and environments that are pretty disturbing for the show. Not to mention plunging Scootaloo into the river. I was surprised that they actually did something like that. Cory Powell, I'm looking forward to some great episodes from you. Don't screw this up. No pressure. When I first started watching episodes of MLP, I started out by watching all the Rainbow Dash episodes. Like I said, the first episode I watched was Read It and Weep, and I was impressed with it, so I decided to check out all of her episodes, until another character stole my fancy. The second episode I watched was The Mysterious Mare-de-Well, which unfortunately will not be making this list. The third one was Sonic Rainboom, which cemented my love of the show. Take a mundane concept, a talent show, throw in a fantasy twist and put it in the sky. Then put in some pretty amazing characters with layers of depth, playing off each other beautifully. Throw in a reference or two and top it off with some stunning animation. That makes for one awesome episode. This is an episode I watch more for the story than the humor, although it is there and some of the jokes are pretty good. Most, however, I've seen so many times that they've kind of lost their impact. I guess somewhat that's a good thing. Only the good jokes get beaten into the ground. There are still plenty though that contain their original funny flavor, but once again, it's the heart that makes me like this episode. Stage fright is something that I can relate to in a big way. Yeah, if I wasn't talking to my computer screen, you probably wouldn't hear a peep out of me. It's amazing how they tapped into that conflict with one of the more social of the main 6. I guess I really like M.A. Larson, since 4 of his episodes have appeared so far. What can I say? He makes some really good episodes. This here is definitely no exception, despite some people who are never satisfied with anything. This is a great grudge match. And here's the thing, I don't really care about Trixie. Or, I should say, I didn't. In Ghostbusters, Trixie was almost as unlikable as everyone else. Not to mention that she was kind of annoying. She only had my sympathy there because everyone else was portrayed in such a despicable way. Here, however, Trixie is amazing. She doesn't have control of her own actions, so the writers can have her do some pretty twisted stuff, like say removing Pinky's mouth, which would slowly lead her to starvation. This is mean-spirited done correctly. You know, never have the heroes do it, like, ever. With the exception of Zecора's cryptic bullshit, everything in this episode is pretty perfect. Though I don't like Twilight levitating the animals, I do appreciate the reference to the Magician Tarot card, not to mention the other references, both to other episodes and to other media. This was M.A. Larson giving his all, which is why it bugs the crap out of me when people call this underwhelming. I mean, what were you expecting? I was expecting a great grudge match. What I got was a great grudge match that redeemed a character, and had a lot of fun at the expense of my two most hated characters. Can't go wrong with that, now can you? Do you want to know the real reason I hate Charlotte Fullerton? It's not this, or even this. It's this. You can't ever get mad at an Ed Wood film. Even though they're horrible movies, it's abundantly clear that that's the best he can do. However, with Suited for Success, Charlotte Fullerton proved that she had talent and she could produce quality work. Everything about this episode works. Yes, all the main six take advantage of Rarity's generosity at the exact same time, which would seem unlikely, but the episode plays it to its advantage. Each of the main six become the typical types of clients that artists usually have to deal with. Twilight knows exactly what she wants, but that goes against aesthetic design. Pinkie Pie wants what she thinks is cool right at the moment without considering the finished product. Rainbow Dash is the note when I see it type. Applejack doesn't give a damn about aesthetics, and Fluttershy thinks that she knows Rarity's job better than she does, while only having a very cursory knowledge about it. It's not coming out of nowhere for no real reason. It's not that I'm watching the puppeteer, it's that I'm more focused on her than the puppet. If I'm more focused on the wonderful character development, I'm less inclined to notice the shoehorn plot, conflicts, or characters. If they have to be there, push them into the background. Charlotte Fullerton, you can do good things. Great things even. I want you to do more good things. I want to be able to like you as a writer. You can do this. I think that Amy Keating Rogers is great at telling very simple stories. Her episodes tend to have less plot, which is fine, usually. When she tries to tell complex stories, they usually fall on their face, as the plots come together in a jumbled mess. This episode works to her advantage. Instead of one complex plot, this episode tells 6 simple ones, and intertwines them perfectly. Each of the simple stories in this episode are some of Amy Keating Rogers' best, Fluttershy's especially. Yeah, despite putting her hoofs down treatment of Fluttershy, I still find her going crazy in this episode hilarious. The difference here is that it's toned down, and you can actually understand Fluttershy's outburst. But let's not give Amy Keating Rogers all the credit. I love At the Gala. I know I said that Art of the Dress was my favorite Season 1 song. On repeated listens, this is my favorite Season 1 song. Each of the verses are like a whole new song, and each of them are awesome. My favorite of them has to be Rainbow's. Does anyone else find it strange that after 3 seasons, she still hasn't had her own solo song yet, despite her voice actress being an actual singer? Writers, get on that. Hey, it's another movie homage, except I didn't see this one. This episode kinda makes me want to though, maybe. Anyone know if Top Gun's a good movie? I'm getting off track. You know, I normally don't care for military-type boot camp scenarios, but this episode warmed me up to it. There are 2 reasons that I really like this episode. One is Lightning Dust, and the other is Rainbow Dash. Lightning Dust is my favorite one-shot character to date. If I were to describe her simply, she's Gilda done right. Rainbow and Lightning play off each other wonderfully. Lightning shows what reckless ambition can have you become, and helps Rainbow realize that. She even comes to realize the moral herself by the end, I think. Yeah, the ambiguous ending still holds this episode back for me, but I suppose that could be resolved if they ever decide to bring Lightning back. Please bring her back, by the way. Maybe she can team up with Gilda and they'll try to take Rainbow out or something. As for Rainbow, this is definitely the best character development she's gotten. Most people saw this as an apology from Mare-Do-Well. I didn't, really. After all, Mare-Do-Well didn't put Meriwether Williams on my bad side. But I will say this, Wonderbolts Academy did help bring her back into my good graces in a big way, pushing Rainbow to who she'll eventually become. This is an episode where the puppeteer is plainly visible for all to see, but you don't focus on her because the puppet is just that damn good. There are so many logical problems and plot holes in this episode, but the experience of the episode is just so good that most people tend to not really care. Of course, some people do and make 30-minute long reviews detailing all of those problems. Instead of focusing on where the hell Twilight's brother came from, I'm instead focusing on how great and realistic, if a little idolized, their relationship is. Instead of focusing on the villain's convoluted plan, I'm instead focusing on how powerful she got, and how she really gives the main 6 a run for their money. I can fully understand why people don't like this episode. Like I said, the flaws are right out there in the open. It's just the story, the emotion, the actions, and the interactions are all so well done that in the end they really don't matter to me. Yes, this episode is flawed, but for once I don't give a damn. And don't even get me started on the songs. This Day aria especially. It's expertly crafted, amazingly intense, and just wonderful. You know, I don't think I have nearly enough M.A. Larson on this list. He created the best two-parter to date, and I really hope he's the one who writes the apparently other two parts to Magical Mystery Cure. From the storyboards, it seems to be right up his alley. Aside from the rush ending of this episode, which is par for the course with M.A. Larson, this episode is pretty amazing. Obviously, Discord makes this episode great, a perfect fusion of humorous and diabolical. He always has a plan, but you'll never guess what it is because half of the time, he doesn't even know what it is. The way he plays with the main six is just awesome, although I still question the reasoning behind some of them. It's interesting to see the main six corrupted as they were. You could write entire arcs based on them. In fact, I hope they do. And yes, I do mean all of them. I mean, corrupted Fluttershy was an angel next to whatever the hell that was. You could do plenty with the characters, and bend them in all kinds of crazy ways when you take them out of their own right mind. Honestly, this is pretty interchangeable with my last pick, but two things bring the advantage to the Cutie Mark Chronicles. The first of them is that M.A. Larson was able to tell just as good a story, spotlighting all of the characters perfectly in half the time. Nothing against the two-parters, but if there's a choice between watching one of them or a single episode, I will invariably choose a single episode. The other thing is that the characters are who they should be, none of that opposite of who they're supposed to be stuff. Like The Best Night Ever, this episode tells 6 stories. Scratch that, 7 stories. But unlike that episode, each one of them have their own unique flavor, whether it be funny, compelling, or just adorable. Each one of them is outstanding, and it all comes together fantastically. I really wish that we had more flashback episodes. I mean, there's so much potential with it. I'm not asking for 6 of them in one episode, although that would be nice. When you come to think of it, we really don't know much about the main 6 and their history, Pinky's especially. Regardless, we still have this one amazing episode. Just missing the top 5 is Party of One. Don't get me wrong, this episode is top notch. In fact, it's my favorite episode of season 1. I'm just gonna say that before I started watching this episode, I was completely in the dark to Pinky's psychotic breakdown. It took me completely by surprise. Even now, I don't know if it's the funniest thing I've ever seen, or the creepiest thing I've ever seen. Either way, it's still probably the weirdest. Even ignoring that, the comedy in this episode is phenomenal, some of the best the show has ever had. It's constantly throwing new jokes at you and pretty much all of them hit bullseyes. Then there's the theme of the episode. It's actually really easy to get paranoid that your friends are avoiding you, and this episode showcases it perfectly. It also leaves plenty of ambiguity. In the beginning, we saw exactly what a Pinkie Pie party was like. Most people wouldn't want to do 2 of those in a row. Granted, the ending is fairly predictable, but that's pretty much the only thing holding this episode back. Everything else in this episode is some of the best cartoon comedy that I've ever seen. Well, it was at one point. In my opinion, there are several reasons that make this episode better than Party of One. First of all, if you can be hilarious with just one Pinkie Pie, you could be even more so with tons of them. And this episode is amazingly funny. It's probably the funniest episode in the show. After all, your Dave Polsky is in his element. And he doesn't even throw the story to the wayside for once. Yeah, what really makes this episode for me, believe it or not, is the story. Like I've already said, it's much more believable that Pinkie Pie would think she was a clone instead of forgetting her own birthday, because this show is unbelievably weird. Speaking of which, I don't think I've ever seen the original character doubt that she was the original. Not only does the episode do that, it does the rest of the cloning storyline pretty well. Is this episode perfect? No, but after the shock value of Trigger Happy Twilight goes down, I'm able to enjoy this episode from beginning to end. I love every joke in this episode. More importantly, I love Pinkie's emotional conflict as she sees the clones tormenting her friends, and realizes that it's all her fault. More than the jokes, that's what makes this episode for me. Hell, I even enjoy the nightmares that this episode gave me. I spent 17 minutes rambling on about this episode in my actual review, connecting all the plot points, and in doing so, I fell in love with everything about this episode. It's definitely a strange episode. Whenever I watch it, it instantly becomes my favorite episode. And then I watch some other episodes, and realize that I like them better. But going back and forth, I think that this is a good enough place for it. Since I already talked about like everything but the songs, I guess I'll talk about the songs now. My favorite song from the show to date is Celestia's Ballad. Not only is it incredibly beautiful, it seems to recap the entire series quite nicely. Yeah, I'm holding off on my top 10 songs until at least season 4 is over. This episode also contains my second favorite song, A True True Friend, which does pretty much the same thing for the themes of the show. I do love all the other songs in the episode too. If I'd put them in order, it's I've Gotta Find a Way, What My Cutie Mark Is Telling Me, Life in Equestria, Morning in Ponyville, and Behold Princess Twilight Sparkle. This is the episode that made me want to do all of this. Not just the review stuff, this episode actually made me want to become a part of the community. The themes of friendship in this episode are just that incredibly amazing and precise. It doesn't take any excuses.
Would you try, just give it a chance? You might find that you'll start to understand.
It's beautiful to look at, it's beautiful to listen to, it's the show in its purest form. Of the mental breakdown episodes, this one is my favorite for several reasons. For one, it was the focus of the episode. It didn't just come out of nowhere. That worked for Party of One, but this episode used that concept and it actually ran with it. I'm still shocked that the show got away with like half of this stuff. At one point we even see Fluttershy snap a bear's neck. I mean, what the hell? More importantly, in this episode Twilight's friends felt guilty for inadvertently sending her into a psychotic state. They're immediately willing to take the blame, even though they did pretty much nothing wrong. After all, anyone could clearly see that Twilight was overreacting, and it never seemed like they were being inconsiderate.
Twilight? Is there something Twilight?
Those little touches are what makes this show so great. I've heard that the writers and animators are having fun in Season 4. In this episode, you can clearly tell that they were having fun, making Twilight look that batshit crazy. If that ends up getting us some episodes as good, crazy, and heartfelt as Lesson 0, then Season 4 will be like my favorite season ever. You did it, Cindy Morrow. I don't know how you did it, but you did it. You created an episode that does sibling interactions realistically. You've got the realistic fighting. You've got the realistic heartwarming moments. You've got a situation where there is no real bad guy. You've taught so many beautiful morals in this one episode. Let's start with the obvious one. Being siblings isn't always easy, but there are more good things than not. It's a relationship of give and take. Another good moral in this episode is that saying sorry doesn't always make it okay. Isn't that right, Mystery on the Friendship Express? You've actually got to work to make things right sometimes. And here's another moral. You don't have to win a competition, or even finish one, to enjoy time with your siblings. The strangest part is how rare things like this are. In almost every other show, siblings almost always go the Dexter's Laboratory route and turn them into the worst of enemies. That's not what siblings are. Why don't any media people seem to realize that? No, just turn them into Tom and Jerry. Thank you, Cindy Morrow, for breaking all cliches by doing something realistically. It's bizarre, isn't it? The episode I like the least and the episode I like the most star the exact same character. On top of that, they're within 3 episodes of each other. In fact, this episode succeeds in all of the ways that Putting Your Hoof Down fails. Both of them are about Fluttershy asserting herself, but in this episode, she's sending that aggression towards where it should be, her own inabilities and insecurities. The stage fright in this episode is real. The cause of it is real. The entire conflict is real. Even if you never had stage fright before, you could still relate to Fluttershy's dilemma. The episode makes it clear that even though it's not Fluttershy's fault that she has stage fright, it's still her problem. She has to deal with it. The episode showcases that even if you try your hardest, you can still end up failing spectacularly. That is a moral that everyone needs to learn. You can give it your all, and you could still not only fail, but fail horribly. But by no means should you stop trying. And those aren't even the main morals of the episode. I can go on and on talking about how much I love this episode for hours. But I think I've talked enough about this episode in both my review of the episode and my top 5 favorite writers list. Right now, I gotta focus on the craziest idea that I've ever had in my life. Dare I even say that it's Pinkie Pie crazy. Join me next time when I reveal what it is.
A friend in need. A friend will be there to help them see. A true friend helps a friend in need to see the light that shines from a true friend.
Hello? Friend trapped inside, remember?
Rarity needs your help. She's trying hard, doing what she can. Would you try? Just give it a chance.